package, right? That makes you you, that makes you unique, that helps put a spotlight on the value that you bring into the world. When you can do that and be so confident and come from that grounded place and make decisions from that place and align with that, and even your leadership style, if it comes from that place of authenticity and just grounded in who you are, you're so much more powerful, and you can get so much more alignment from that place. So that is my story. That's how I, got to where I am, and that's why I'm so passionate about helping and supporting introverted servant leaders today.
Welcome to the Psych and Business Podcast. We're here to show you how practical psychology can be useful and make your workplace better. I'm Dr. Ernest Wayde. Okay, so we have a really interesting guest for you today. She's actually an international guest, originally from South Africa. She's an executive coach focusing on supporting introverted female servant leaders in the corporate world. Her name is Sharissa Sebastian-Deppen. Sharissa is the CEO of Leadership Mastery Alliance and an executive coach and speaker. Sharissa has a unique process of helping leaders identify their leadership zone of genius so that they can shine while embracing their introversion and desire to serve without sacrificing their life outside of work. Sharissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ernest. It's a pleasure to be here, and I cannot wait for our conversation today.
I'm so excited to have you here, especially because you're from South Africa. I spent a lot of time in Africa, in Botswana and Zimbabwe, and so I'm really excited to have a fellow continent mate here. So welcome to the show. Before we jump into your work, I always want to ask, tell us about yourself. How did you get into this kind of work? Tell us about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you the Cliff Notes version because it's a very long, winding road, as I'm sure most of our journeys are, right, in our careers.
Yeah.
But basically, the background to how I got to where I am, I'll start with my undergrad degree. So when I graduated from high school, I had no clue what I wanted to do, and my dad basically said, "Okay, well, you're good at math and science. How about you try this, this new thing, this new technology that's up in, technology area field that's up and coming." That will definitely date me because I'm old. That was way back when technology was like, not a very well-known field of study. And so back then I was like, well, okay, I was young and I had no clue what was ahead of me. And so I went into technology. And so I graduated with a software engineering degree, went into the field, and then moved over into, to the US and started working in the tech space. And then after that, I kind of moved into, I was in several different roles within that tech space, and then went into technology leadership. And that's where I spent the rest of my corporate career. And so I spent about 13 years in that corporate career before I transitioned into coaching. And what actually happened towards the end of that career, and what was kind of the catalyst to leading me into coaching, well, first of all, it's very much a faith-based journey for me. So I started towards the end of my corporate career, I started to get really burnt out. There were certain things that just weren't working well for me, didn't align really well. And so at that point, I was so stuck and I was confused and I didn't know why. I was just really stressed out. I was being stretched way too thin in terms of what I was doing and hours and all that kind of stuff. And I was also juggling being a single mom at that time. So of course, like you mentioned, I'm from South Africa, so I had a very small support system. I didn't really have a ton of support at that time. And so it was very easy for me to get burnt out because I didn't have, a ton of people around me that I could lean on for support. And so at that point in time, I just kind of prayed through it. I was like, okay, God, there's got to be something more, it must be something that I'm missing here because I know this is not how I'm supposed to feel in my career. But because I was in that career for so long, that is all I knew. And so basically what ended up happening next was so interesting. I was scrolling through Groupon because, of course, as a single mom trying to, save some money at that time, I was like, okay, I'm scrolling through. Didn't think about it. It wasn't career related at all, but I happened to find an ad from a career coach, and he asked me all the right questions. He said things like, are you stuck in your career? Are you not sure what your next step is? Do you need some clarity? And I was like, oh my goodness, yes, and yes. And how are you in my head? And who are you? Like, what is a coach? I didn't even know. I had no concept of what coaching was, other than on the sports field. And so through that whole process, that's when that process of self-discovery really started. And that's when I felt like all of the light bulbs started to go off, as far as not just who I was and how I'm wired, and just that alignment and clarity to get me to what I do now, which is coaching, which is what I absolutely love. But also it gave me like a bit of spotlight on how I can then serve other people. And so the more I was coached and the more I was exposed to that process, the more it made sense to me. But I also just felt so drawn to it because I was like, wow, okay, I could do this. Like, this is something that I
Mm-hmm.
feel passionate about. And so I enrolled in a coaching school to get certified. And the first weekend that I was in person with all these amazing people, I was like, oh my goodness, I found my people and this is what I want to do. And so that's how I transitioned into coaching full time, and then basically left the corporate world, jumped with both feet into the business side of things, which was a whole other roller coaster ride. But I was so passionate about that, and I just felt like that was really my calling, and so I just kind of pushed through that piece of it and learned so much along the way with business and marketing and all the other things. And so I started off being a career coach simply because, like, at that part of that transition in my life, I just wanted to help as many people as possible get clarity
Mm-hmm.
on their careers.
Mm-hmm.
And then I eventually transitioned into leadership because, again, that was also based on my experience as an introverted leader. And there was so much that I personally struggled with to find my space in the workplace and to figure out how to really, have that impact and influence. And so what I do today, kind of fast forward to today, I help leaders specifically who are introverted servant leaders, who really have a heart for people and are very people focused and want to just help and support their teams, help and support the business, but also want to do that that's very much aligned with who they are. So, helping them to not fall into that comparison trap like I did, like comparing myself,
Yeah.
right, to other leaders who show up differently. And I'm like, okay, well, how can I do that? And why do I not, naturally, I'm not inclined to do that kind of thing. And so that really hurt me in my career. But it wasn't until I experienced coaching, went through that process of self-discovery, that I realized, like, oh, wow, there is a way for me as an introvert to show up in the
Mm-hmm.
world
Mm-hmm.
that feels really good and is very much aligned. And it's not just introversion. There's so many other aspects. I call this the leadership zone of genius. So when you uncover and unpack your leadership zone of genius, which includes your strengths, your interests, the things that you're just naturally passionate about and curious about. It's also your experience. It's this whole package, right, that makes you, that makes you unique, that helps put a spotlight on the value that you bring into the world. When you can do that and be so confident and come from that grounded place and make decisions from that place and align with that, and even your leadership style, if it comes from that place of authenticity and just grounded in who you are, you're so much more powerful, and you can get so much more alignment from that place. So that is my story. That's how I got to where I am, and that's why I'm so passionate about helping and supporting introverted servant leaders today.
Yeah, I love that story. There's so many things that I want to touch on there. I love your experience in technology, because I have that experience as well in technology. So I love that aspect of it, and I really appreciate what you said in terms of self discovery. I've been through self discovery, and as you mentioned, it can sometimes be challenging. So I really appreciate that you've been through that. I want to ask you a little bit about what you said in terms of the introverted leader and your self discovery journey. What are some of those strengths that people bring as introverted leaders? When we're talking about the zone of genius, what do you notice are some of the strengths that introverted leaders have, and then on the other side, what are the challenges that introverted leaders have to deal with?
Yes. Oh, this is a great question. So, as far as strength, and I love that you're using that word, because Susan Cain, who if there's any introverts out there that are curious about introversion, you might be familiar with her name. She's done a lot of work in the space of introverted leadership from a psychology perspective, and a lot of research in that space. And
Mm-hmm.
she has coined this term, quiet strength. And introverts really have incredible strength. It may look different, right, than extroverts, for example, but at the same time, there's so much value in unpacking those strengths and how they show up. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
give you some, just a few of them to get. There's so much more, but in the interest of time, I'll touch on like a few of the strengths of introverts. And maybe the listeners, if you're listening to me, you might either be an introvert or an extrovert. But for introverts, what I would encourage you to do is use this as like a jumping off point. If you identify with any of these things, just know that there's so much more to unpack in this area. And so a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is going to be aligned with the introverts, but also for extroverts who might be listening. This is such a great opportunity to learn a little bit more about the people around you and help to identify who might be a little bit more introverted, so that you can engage with them in a more effective way. So going back to answer your question, as far as introverts and their strengths, one is introverts tend to take in a lot. They're very introspective, so they're taking in information from their environment, and they're active. They're very good at active listening. So when they're engaged in conversation, they're oftentimes very focused. They're able to really, like, lean in with curiosity and understanding. They want to know a lot about, like, the people that they're working with, the environment. They're constantly taking in information. But that also means that they need the time to be able to process through some of that, because there's a lot of information coming in, and they're
Yeah.
internal processes for the most part, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
if you have introverted people around you, and if you notice that they're a little bit, they're not the first ones to necessarily speak, or they're not always loudest people in the room, that's only because they're taking, it's not that they're disengaged or they're antisocial or anything like that. And there's a lot of these labels, that before, like in the past, introverts, it's very easy to get labeled in that way, not because people are, not with bad intention, but simply because they're misunderstood. So I love that we're in an age now where there's the spotlight in how we're wired differently, not just introversion and extroversion, but from a lot of different perspectives. But coming back to introverts, they typically are going to want to take the time to kind of internally process and connect the dots in their mind to be able to then formulate, okay, how do I then engage in a conversation, or how do I provide value in a meeting setting, for example, and in the workplace. And so giving them the space to do that is going to be important. The other thing about introverts is they're really good in like the one-on-one type of settings. So if you really want to have an engaged conversation with an introvert, that's oftentimes, like, I always recommend having a one-on-one conversation with them so they can be a little bit more comfortable and they feel like they can really engage and go a little bit deeper in that conversation.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. And then we chatted about, like, active listening as well. They're really good at really absorbing and processing information, and they're often very deep thinkers. But again, they need that space to be able to do that. And they also have, because of all of that, they also tend to lean into empathy as well, because they're naturally curious. They ask questions. They want to listen. They want to learn and take in information. They're oftentimes really attuned to, like, on an emotional intelligence level. They can be very empathetic when it comes to, like, understanding others and then wanting to connect in that way. And so those are just some of the strengths of introverted leaders. So on the other side of that, though, as far as the challenges that they could face in the workplace, first of all, is not being understood, right? A lot of times, and it's not, it's nobody's fault. It's just that maybe people haven't had the opportunity to really understand how introverts are wired, and so it's really difficult to engage. So I always, I always encourage my introverts to not be afraid to tell people, like, the way they're wired or the way they communicate, and that kind of, especially as leaders. I always tell my leaders, when you have an opportunity to, say you have a new team member joining, or you're establishing your team or anything like that, don't be afraid to let people know, like, this is my tendency as a leader. Just because I'm really quiet in a meeting doesn't mean that I'm disengaged or anything like that. I'm the type of leader that, I want to hear from everybody, and then I'm happy to, share my opinion. So give people the opportunity to learn a little bit about your style and your approach, so that there's very little opportunity for misunderstanding there. And also advocate for yourself. Don't be afraid to ask for what you need. So for example, introverts, because they like that, to be able to plan and to prepare ahead of time, asking for information that you need ahead of a meeting, or asking for what you need, can really, really be helpful to helping introverts feel a little bit more prepared in those meeting settings. But
Yeah.
sometimes that can be a challenge, right? If people don't really understand
How to work best with you.
how
I
to,
love
yeah,
that advice in terms of, for introverted leaders, being upfront about how to work best with you, what works best with you,
yes,
and how to engage your team best. Especially letting them know, just because I'm not speaking doesn't mean that I'm disengaged. It means that I'm taking time to think about it. Bring things to
exactly.
me early. I love that kind of advice. It helps the team know, okay, how should we work with you to get the best out of you and to work best with you. So I love that advice. Now,
Thank you.
I know you work specifically with introverted women who are in the corporate world, and so now that's layers of complexity that we're adding on, right? You have the
Yes.
introverted, we have the women, and then in the corporate world, what are some of the challenges that you see in terms of all of this complexity happening for women a lot in the corporate world?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of that focus comes from a couple of different areas. One is my own experience, of course, as a female leader in that space. But the second thing is, I've noticed I've been doing this for over 10 years now. I've been coaching for over 10 years now, and I've coached, over 1,000 people at this point. And so it's very fascinating to me to see the different dynamics and also the types of people that come into, my coaching practice. And I've noticed that I tend to attract a lot of introverts and also a lot of women into my coaching practice, probably because, they can relate to me and they know that I have experience in that space. But also the other thing, going back to what you were saying about the complexities, women are obviously wired a little bit different than men, right? And so the
Right.
way they show up, and the way they engage is a little bit, there's slight nuances there when it comes to the differences between men and women. And a lot of times, again, this goes back to that, like, misconception or being misunderstood in the workplace. A lot of times we have these dynamics where, and I hear this so much, sadly, where there's this conflict, right, between, like, oh, I'm a woman, so I have to prove myself in the workplace, and I have to make sure that, I'm not only just advocating for myself, but it's almost like I've got to struggle to find that, or to make the space for myself. And it ends up with this kind of conflict energy, which can be very, not only is that very stressful and frustrating when you walk into a workplace and you're like, okay, now I've got to, push through this. But there's another way of doing that, right? You don't have to necessarily feel like just because you're a female in a workplace, especially if you're in a field where, maybe it's a little bit more male dominated and you struggle with those dynamics. There are ways to not only embrace your introversion in those spaces, but to be able to advocate for yourself and navigate those relationship dynamics where you still feel like you can have the impact and influence that you want to have and provide that value without feeling like you constantly have to fight against or fight to prove yourself or anything like that. So yeah, that's why I've spoken specifically on that area, because there's so much to unpack that, even though, in that area, even though it is pretty specific.
Yeah. No, I love the experience that you have, especially that you're able to bring your own experience in the tech world too, especially because I know, especially in that time frame, there weren't a lot of female leaders in the tech world. So you've
Right.
brought a lot of that experience to the work that you do. And the other area that I want to ask you about is your focus on leading in uncertain times, right? Because I know that that's something that you also talk about, and knowing yourself in order to lead yourself and others in uncertain times. Tell us about why you think it's important that people really have a better understanding of themselves in order to help them lead others better.
Oh yes, that's so good. And you actually hit the nail on the head with the way you said that, because it is so important. You've got to know yourself. You've got to know that's such a good starting point when you want to make a difference, right? And when you want to help your team navigate through uncertainty and all this rapid change that happens, especially in a field like technology. And so I think starting with yourself and starting with, again, going back to that term that I used earlier, that leadership zone of genius. And basically all that is knowing yourself really well, knowing your strengths, knowing the areas that you need to be a little bit more prepared for, knowing, all of those things, all of those dynamics, knowing how you can show up in the best possible way, regardless of your circumstances, especially when you are trying to navigate uncertainty and when you're helping others to do the same. You need to be really grounded. You need to be fully energized. I always tell, my leaders, you want to make sure that you are pouring from a full cup. So make sure, especially as introverts, because introverts tend to get their energy from, being by themselves or recouping and all of that before they can then go back and engage in the workplace, engage in their relationships and things like that. So you want to make sure you're taking care of yourself. And that means things like your emotional well-being, your spiritual well-being, your physical well-being. I mean, there's so many different relational well-being, your social connections. All of those things are really key and important. And they go into helping you to truly step into that leadership zone of genius so you can be in the flow when you're in those times of uncertainty and rapid change. So connecting the dots between who I am, how do I want to show up, my leadership identity, right? How do I want to be known, my leadership legacy? So when you come from that place of clarity, it's so much easier then to make good values-based decisions in those moments of uncertainty and really keep that North Star, right? So know why are you there? I love Simon Sinek's work around, start with why. Know the reason that you're there and connect deeply with meaningful work so that when you show up in the workplace, regardless of how all of that uncertainty and sometimes chaos, right, that can be going on and things that just don't go your way necessarily, and then all the changes that are happening, when you have that guiding star, when you know, okay, I'm doing this work because of XYZ reason, this is why it's impactful and meaningful work to me. So I'm going to show up in my best possible version, at the highest version of myself, to be able to not just support myself in these moments, but then also go and support others. It makes navigating that uncertainty, a lot easier. And so that's another reason I focus on that, because also as introverts, we like to feel prepared. We like to feel like we've had the time or even just the mental ability to be able to prepare for whatever's coming. But of course, in uncertainty, as the name implies, right, you can't prepare for
Can't really
things.
prepare for that. Yeah.
Yes, you can only focus on what you can control. I always say this a lot in my coaching practice. You can only focus on what you can control versus what you can't. And what you can control is you and how you feel and how you show up and how prepared you are internally for the unknown.
Yeah, I love that because I think it's really important, as you said, you can only control what you can control, especially as an introvert, and control is important, as you mentioned, to introvert. I want to lean on your experience a little bit. One of the things that you mentioned is that, you were able to design the life that you wanted, right? And so I really found that to be really important. How do you start with that? If you're an introvert and you're finding that your experience isn't working for you, how did you start designing the life that you wanted? Walk us through that experience.
Well, I have to give my coach, actually my coaches, there's been several coaches that I've been working with over the years, credit for this, because they helped me to actually take a step back from the everyday, and they asked me really powerful questions that helped me to design the life. And at first when I did this, I was like, this feels crazy to me. Like what I want feels so much outside of the realm of possibility.
Hmm.
And of course, part of that is also part of my faith journey, because at the beginning of the coaching process, I didn't really know what I wanted, and I had no idea how to even, have a bigger outlook than what I had at the time. All I was focused on is, okay, how do I get to a job that is more aligned with who I am? But in asking those questions and unpacking that a little bit more and thinking about, okay, who am I? What am I passionate about? What are the things that, and I love I read this somewhere recently where it's like, what are those things that you can say, not on my watch, right? So in other words, the things that align with what drives you, what causes are really important to you. For me, it's like, I never want another woman to feel and experience what I went through when I was so stuck and so frustrated in my corporate career. So I'm like, not on my watch. Well, if I can help it, I'm going to help as many women specifically as possible to not feel the way that I feel. And that's so much about what we're talking about today, with all of these different elements coming together. But when I was talking about, like basically being able to just dream big and say, here are the things, like if I could design my ideal life, here's what it would look like, and here's how it aligns with the things that are really important to me. I did this 10 years ago, and I can honestly, it gives me chills when I even say this. In fact, the home that I'm living in right now is part of that. And this only happened 2 weeks ago. I moved into this home 2 weeks ago, but I'm sitting here and I'm looking outside at the view. And honestly, this is something I dreamt about 10 years ago. But within that period, like more than 90% of what I had written down 10 years ago
Hmm.
is what I'm living right now. So that intentionality behind that, and that alignment with that, and that drive towards what's important to you is so critical. And the good thing about it, the good news for introverts, is that we are very introspective. We do, if we give ourselves the opportunity, we are really good at sitting down and then focusing internally and asking ourselves the questions and unpacking that. We have a
Yeah.
natural tendency to want to process things and, think through different things. We're deep thinkers. So that really helps with that process. But of course, you have to give yourself the time and space to do it. And I highly, highly encourage working with somebody that can walk you through the process. I know that helped me tremendously. I would never have thought to do it on my own. So working with a coach, mentor, somebody who can help you to get that clarity, so that as you navigate through life and the ups and downs and uncertainty, there is fulfillment in that, right? So based on all of these things that we're talking about, if you can align with, what feels good to you and what's right to you and the things that are important and really matter while
Hmm.
filling your cup, then you just get so much fulfillment even out of the process, not even just, okay, when I get to that destination, when I achieve X, Y, Z, but that journey and that process becomes so much more enjoyable as well.
Yeah, you've mentioned so many important things here. I think you talk about taking the time to actually be introspective, which is not a lot something that people do a lot. Is take the time to think
Yeah.
about what is it that I want, what's important to me, right? It's not just what do I want, but how does that align to the things that are important to me? Make sure that alignment, and then being explicit and intentional about writing that
Yes.
down and having a plan about how you're going to achieve that. And then I know the other thing that's important to you is mindset, right? Having the right mindset to help you achieve those things.
Yes.
Talk about how that fits into this as well.
Yeah, that was a big part of my initial, the start of my coaching journey. And this is a lot of what I do in my work today, because I've experienced it personally, like how powerful that mindset work can be. Because if you don't believe that what you want is possible, and you don't
Hmm.
believe that you have what it takes to be able to do that, and you're not able to align those two things, it's so much more challenging, right? It becomes more stressful, more frustrating, because you're constantly up against, your belief systems and the things that, your thoughts, your beliefs, all of those different things, because your thoughts are going to determine, your beliefs are going to determine how you think and how you interpret, what's going on around you. Then it's also going to impact your actions, and ultimately it's going to impact where you're going, right? You're like your destination or your destiny. And so you want to make sure that you're examining those. So what we call limiting beliefs in coaching, right? Being able to
Yeah.
unpack that, and know, because of course, like I didn't know what I didn't know when I started the coaching process. And through that whole process, I realized that there were certain things that I was believing about myself and how I was showing up, and also what I was capable of, that was simply not true. And it was
Hmm.
only when I
Hmm.
started to unpack that and work through that and do that deep mindset work, that I was able to really not only just get free from those limiting beliefs, but all sorts of opportunities and options, opened up to me, including a career in coaching, which I had no clue was even available to me at that
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
And so I think that mindset, and I love that you touched on this, because that mindset work is critical. And I will say also, from my own journey and also with a lot of the clients I work with, part of that is also your faith, right? So what are you putting your trust on, your
Hmm.
faith in? Because that also will determine like your level of stress and all of that. Because if you're trying to control things so much, and you're trying to rely on yourself as you navigate through this life and through all of the uncertainty that life brings, it just makes it so much more challenging. So also, and that goes back to the belief system, right? So it all kind of ties in to all of that. And for me, the faith journey was my freedom. I mean, without my faith, I would never have been able to not only have the opportunities, but also have the internal peace and freedom to be able to keep moving forward and keep having the impact and, helping people in the way that I do.
Yeah, I love all of that. I think that resonates with me so much, right? I think you've talked about the importance of the mindset. And for me, it's a continual journey, right? It's a continual need to reinforce my mindset because we all have these negative thoughts and you have to challenge them, right? You have to continually challenge them. And so having that mindset of I can do this, and reinforcing that with yourself consistently and continuously is important, as well as you said, having that relationship with your faith. I mean, for me, being a Christian is such an important part of who I am, and it really helps to guide me and to help push me forward. So I think that resonates really well with me, and I think that would resonate with other people as well. Sharissa, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you. You are so full of knowledge and such great experiences. How do people contact you if they want to continue the conversation or get hold of your services?
Thank you, Ernest. I so appreciate that. This has been so much fun, and I can't believe we're at the end of our conversation already. But yeah, if anyone is listening in, and even if you have questions about what we just chatted about, or you want to connect with me based on something you've heard in this conversation, feel free to reach out to me at info. That's INFO at leadershipmasteryalliance.com, and the website is leadershipmasteryalliance.com. So if you're curious about the work that we do, or if you just have any questions, there's also a ton of free resources, and I love that you touched on this. So the uncertainty and rapid change, I have a free training on there specifically for how to navigate in times of uncertainty and rapid change. So feel free to check that out on my website. And also if you're on LinkedIn, just search for my name on LinkedIn, and I would love to connect with you that way as well. Thank you so much.
That is so awesome. A free training on uncertainty and rapid change, which is something that we all experience right now. I really appreciate that you have that on there for free. So I definitely encourage people to check that out. Before I let you go, I always want to take advantage of the experts we have on the show and ask, what's a tip or a recommendation that you have for leaders, businesses, organizations, especially in this time that we're all in right now?
Yeah, so what I would say is kind of wrapping up the conversation that we already had, but touching on what we talked about is just know yourself really well. Know what helps you to lead really effectively. And then from that place, be curious about others. Be curious about the people that you're engaging with, not just your direct reports, but the other people that you're engaging with in the workplace. And when you are able to connect with them on that deeper human level, it makes it so much easier for you to be more effective as a leader and to just feel really good and fulfilled as you navigate through your career. So that would be my parting thoughts as we wrap up today.
Yeah, I love that. Start with yourself. Before you try to lead others, understand who you are, what your strengths and your challenges are, so that you can leverage those and be mindful of those when you're trying to work with other people. I love that advice. I always think it's so important to start with yourself. So I really appreciate that advice. Well, Sharissa, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you.
And if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving us a review. Feedback is a gift, and we love gifts. Thank you for listening, and I hope you will join us again next time.